Okay.
And I'm going to, just so we sync all our audios together, clap my hands. Okay, now first of all, and this just so I can get audio levels, let me get you to say your name and spell
My name is William A. Hart Jr. WILLIAMAHARTJR.
it. Or should we call you Bill?
Bill, please.
Okay. And so I can get a mic level on you, let me get you to say and spell your name.
Alice, ALICE, Huff, HUFF, Hart, HART.
Okay. So, basically, we were talking a few minutes ago about Mr. Bonesteel and his work, and so you were saying that you kind of met each other through a kind of a mutual love or appreciation or intrigue of George Masa. Is that correct?
I think people who are interested in George Masa have come to love him. He's such an intriguing man, and his story is so interesting that you get attached to him, wouldn't you say?
In love with him. Deep, deep, deep attachment we got and still have.
And kind of expand upon that a little bit, because that's kind of a deep thought. It's when you say a lot, what do you mean?
Well, as Bill did the research, of course, getting to know George Masa, and as we did, we became very emotional about him because he was such an iconic figure, and he gave so much of himself. You know, he never thought of himself. He thought of others. He wanted to see the Smokies. He wanted to do all of the trail, designations. He just wanted to throw himself totally into building the Smokies in the way he did, and his photography, because as seeing his camera, his tripod, and he was a small man, and he carried that endlessly. And I love the stories of him waiting until the light was right and finding just the perfect place to make his pictures, and it shows.
And there's a dimension to him that I'm not sure has ever fully been tapped, but his selflessness in terms of dedication to those things in which he believed. Creation of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the Appalachian Trail, and in those cases, others sort of managed the executive thing, but if there was a question, he went to the Smokies and put feet on the ground and camera and took the pictures to answer the questions. The other things that touched us was his friendship with Horace Hart. Both of them had similar lives. They came here. They made great departures from an early life. Hart left his family to come to the mountains, and Masa made a departure to create a new identity here. And they became friends, and I know when we were researching the article and writing about Hart's death and Masa's reaction to that we both...
We cried. And when I said we loved him, as we realized the depth of his selflessness and the depth of his commitment, you see few people that are willing just to give themselves so totally to something they believe in. And to see that, and Bill getting teary, we spent in that library, and that's where all of our discussion and our research and Bill's research, we were there. And the more that we learned, the more I think that we became emotional. And when I said we loved him, we did, and we will always, because of what we knew about him. And such a model for all of us. It's one thing to say, I want to do something, but when you devote yourself so entirely to something you believe in, I don't even know how to explain it. It's overwhelming.
I think so. One of the things I would also say that while we've talked about his advocacy for the Appalachian Trail, in the Great Smoky Mountains, there was a third aspect about Masa, and that was he was a working photographer. And once we got to know him, we began to collecting any magazine article or any postcard, ephemera, anything that was work of his. And we came to realize that while he was doing these other things, that he, official photographer for the Chamber of Commerce, but he portrayed Western North Carolina to the nation through his work. And our donation to Western Carolina University of that material has something like 300 or more items of ephemera, and that tells the story of that aspect of his work as a photographer. But it also describes the history of Asheville during the 20s and late 30s, and that needs to be understood, because we know about the beauty of his photographs, but the other aspect was that he was working. And Angela Whitmire, who has done the George Masa database, has accumulated more than 2,000 photographs that George Masa did, which is just a major contribution to knowledge about his work as a photographer.
And I will tell you, and Bill will not like that I'm put, because he's very humble, but Bill approached learning about Masa with the intensity that in many ways Masa had, because Bill just didn't give up. He would spend many, many nights in the library researching, finding things. It was just like this constant passion of his to find everything he could. And, it was overwhelming for me to see, and so proud of him. And I participated. I only found one thing all by myself, and I was so proud.
Tell them what it was.
Well, I have a piano that I had a long time. In fact, we moved it because our grandson wants it, so it's down in the other room down here. But in going through the piano bench with a lot of different pieces of music and getting ready to move the bench downstairs, I found this beautiful piece of music that I didn't remember ever having. And I know where I got it. I finally figured it out. But on the front of it was a Masa photo, and on inside was another one, too. And I just flew into the library with Bill. Look what I found! And that's the only thing I found all by myself. So I'm very proud. And it is at Western in the archives over there.
Yep.
But it was amazing, and it was an advertisement for Royal Pines, a very old development in this area, one of the first ever of development. And our next door neighbor, who was a member of a little association there, gave me the piece of music. But I had forgotten. And of course, I didn't know Masa when she gave it to me.
Now, when you say you didn't know Masa, nobody did really. When you started looking into George Masa and started investigating it, how much was there that you hadn't, or that wasn't?
Well,
when you started looking, how much was easily found that you didn't have to dig up?
there was not very much. There had been a major effort culminating in 1960 with the naming of Masa Knob in the Smokies, carried out by the Carolina Mountain Club. But we were in Silva at the time. We didn't take the Appalachian paper, the Asheville paper, so I did not know that. Alice in 1966 gave me Michael Fromm's Strangers in High Places, and he's mentioned in that 2 or 3 times. And in other material on the Smokies, I would find just a reference to George Masa. But by that time, he was a footnote. There was a great deal there. The library had a lot of information, but those people who wrote about the Smokies, or wrote about Cap Hart, knew him as a photographer, but it was almost a passing reference. And then in hiking in the Smokies on the Appalachian Trail, I would pass Masa Knob, so I knew about that. And it's just hard for me to pinpoint. Probably I've seen John Parrish articles about him. You know, John was a prolific writer, but just those incidental references were the things I think that drove my interest.
I remember the first time I heard someone talk about Masa other than Bill, and that was Megan Gordon. And she and her husband, Chan Gordon, as you know, ran the Captain's Bookshelf in Asheville. And they were very close to Anthony Lord, who was a famous architect. You're probably aware of that in Asheville. And Megan mentioned Masa, and I think she might have had a picture. And of course, I think through Anthony Lord, she had known who he was, and I vividly remember that. And it's the first time I remember hearing someone other than when Bill and I were talking. But
Yeah.
it's just vivid in my memory and I've never forgotten it. And then we found out that Anthony Lord was a pallbearer for Masa.
He got to know him in the Carolina Mountain Club.
Yes.
And one of the things that I tried to do over the years is in 1933, he and George McCoy, who was an editor for the Asheville paper, published the Guide to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This was the very first guide on the park. There were some other sketchy things, but this was substantive. And it probably features the most of Masa's photograph in the guide, but also it details trail details in 1933. And one of the things that I did with a friend was to seek out some of those trails. Of course, some of them are common trails in the Smokies today, but these were difficult off-trail places to do. But in doing that, I always felt a connection to him when I was there, and knowing that he had been there and he wrote about this. And that's another way to sort of place your footsteps in the steps of a hero. So that's another connection that we feel with Masa.
Yeah, and you probably know that Bill has walked all of the trails in the Smokies, a lot of off-trail. So he has stepped where so many iconic people have stepped, including Native Americans. And that's a wonderful connection, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because he's not going to brag on himself.
No, he's not, but I can.
So I'm going to ask you, how much would be lost about George Masa if it wasn't for him?
I think a great deal, because he started the engine, if you want to put it that way, and it inspired Paul and others. But once Paul caught this bug, he went through it too. I mean, it wasn't just Bill, but Paul gives him credit for being the person that really started the interest. And of course, the other thing was that Bill had hiked, to Masa Knob. He had hiked all the time in the Smokies, and he knew the history. And Bill was a curious person. And once he starts something, he doesn't let go. And I think that made a huge difference. And I also think the first film that Paul did, where it really introduced Bill, and people, we've had a lot of people come in here and do research. Janet McHugh spent hours. In fact, she's coming back in a couple of weeks. And she did a research in that room, it's full of files, so it was, until they went to Western. So it has been contagious in such a wonderful way.
And that is true. That it's been interesting that Paul did his film, and then Ken Burns did his National Park series, and he used the friendship between Horace Kephart and George Masa as the vehicle to tell the story of the Smokies, which was an oversimplification because so many more people were involved, and that they haven't gotten the recognition they deserve. But Paul and Janet McHugh have really, with the Kephart biography, George Masa, Life Reimagined, discovered the life that no one knew about. You know, Paul's film and what I wrote were what the life we knew, but there was another more complex life there that no one knew anything about, and they discovered that, and so their work is sort of the pinnacle, I think, of George Massa research, and as well as what Angela and Whitmire has done too. These are monumental things.
We'll go back. Bill mentioned Ken Burns, so we're accredited in that film because they interviewed Bill. I guess both of us. I don't remember.
Now I have another question because just a second ago, you said use the word hero. Why? Why that word? Why hero?
Well, I'm working on a book, and in the book is a chapter in search of heroes, and the heroes are Horace Kephart, Paul Feig, and George Massa, and they became heroes to me as I became interested in the park because of their particular contributions, and so I just they were heroes to me because of that, and fortunately Paul Fink was still alive, and I was able to correspond with him up to near the time of his death, and then we know Libby Kephart Hargrave, who is Horace Kephart's great-granddaughter, and so I don't know, there's, like I say, the main thing is what they did for the park, and the ability to figuratively get to know them.
And I think it's also concerned with legacy, and the legacies are tremendous, and I think Bill's going to leave a wonderful legacy.
My widow.
No, I'm going to be with you, Bill. We're going to both do it together. Everything else we've done 65 years. Sorry, skip that. I admire what my husband has achieved, and I'm riding along with him, and I'm grateful because we've done a lot together. But credit is where it's due.
And I guess my final question is, what is it about George Massa that once people learn a little bit about him, people like yourself and Paul Bonesteel and Whitmire and what's her name with the George Massa database? You just mentioned her name a second ago.
Angela Whitmire.
Yeah. What is it about George Massa that's so intriguing? That once people start to learn a little about him, they kind of become a little obsessive.
Well, what do you think?
Oh my goodness. I'll speak for myself on that and then let Bill answer. But I started doing watercolor after retirement. In 2012, I got lessons with Elizabeth Ellison, who's premier watercolorist in the region. And as I started studying photos of George Massa, I became obsessed with the way he did his photography, how he would set it up. There would be a branch. Something would focus us on the clouds, the mountains, all of that. And Bill can tell you, I don't know how many times he has had to stop in the Smokies and the Parkway because I'm driving along and I see the view and it's George Massa. So I'm obsessed with him for his photography, and I find it intriguing. So that's just for me personally. And we've talked about the depth of his character and who he was. But I'm obsessive about getting out and finding a new watercolor.
Well, I've been interested in the Appalachian Trail and sectioned hike it over the years, and appreciated what George contributed to that. And Alice and I both have devoted a great part of our life to the Smokies. and I admire his photography, but I think the thing that intrigues me most, he came here in 1950 and went to work at the Grove Park. He died in 1933, and in those 18 years, his achievements were monumental. And I'm just overwhelmed to think how he achieved that. And it goes back to what Alice said, just complete devotion to the things that were important to him.
And that's pretty much all the questions I have. I think we have way more. Oh no, you jump in. Come
I mean, she asked questions up at
No, you go right ahead, please. And sorry.
Well, for one, this one's not specifically about George Massa, but I am curious. You know, you told me that your parents went to Western, and then you guys went to Western, and then your grandson went to Western.
our son.
Your son, sorry. For you guys, where has your love come from for this area in general, for Western North Carolina? That's made you stay this whole time.
Well, do you want me to start?
Sure.
We've actually spoken about that through some of our biographical materials and Bill's, several different times. We grew up in the mountains. I grew up in Silva. Bill grew up in Weaverville. Both of us have family histories that go back to early 1700s, where families settled the area and they stayed there. And they devoted their time and their lives to the area. But when we started our marriage, we both were very interested in the area. And there were times where Bill was working with Taylor Instrument Company, and we talked about their corporate headquarters were in New York. And we thought, well, what if, we were asked to move? And we decided then that we did not ever want to leave here. But if we stayed here, we wanted to know as much as we could about the area, about the crafts, about all of the things Bill's talked about, the trails, the books, the things that we have given to our library. It is the Bill and Alice Hart Western Regional Library at UNCA. The books there are books that were collected over 55 years. And the books are written by or about Western North Carolina. When you get up to the library, you'll see a collection of pottery from some of the earliest potteries in the Buncombe County in this area. And you already asked about baskets. I grew up as a child, as a young woman, knowing baskets. I worked in Cherokee as a teenager and was interested in baskets. And actually, more Bill and I became an obsession with him to find every different weave and different basket we could find. So we built our lives together, understanding how we fit into this area and what the people here contributed to the essence of Western North Carolina.
Yeah, I agree with that it was just a matter, if we were going to be here rather than just live here, we needed to know something of the history, so baskets and regional potters and those aspects, carvers. You'll see some of this in the library, but that was part of it. And just as a side, Alice, we are tied to the area. I'm a sixth generation descendant of James Reeves, who settled in Big Sandy Mush in I think it was 1799, and was one of the first 800 settlers in Buncombe County. And now I'm going to talk without researching my history, but I think A.C. Reynolds briefly was the president of Western Carolina University at one time. And I better check that. Is that true, you think?
That's true.
And A.C. Reynolds married my great-grandmother's sister. So I'm full of arcane information that nobody cares for, at least.
Well, and what Bill's saying, our roots are very, very deep here through our families. And Bill's are in Buncombe County, mine are in Jackson County. and they kind of roll over a little bit to Haywood County because that, you know, was one. The two were together up to a point. And so it's just been a joy to know more. I think we're both learners. We're lifelong learners, and we haven't stopped.
Tell them
And
about the
hopefully-
Foxfire
Oh,
House.
Foxfire. Yeah, are you familiar with Foxfire? He's shaking his head. He is. Well, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, my great grandfather's cabin is in Foxfire, and it's one of the first ones you come to when you go up through there. And so we went, and it was just wonderful to see it. There's also a family home that is over toward Brevard in the Allison Deaver house that is over there. Those are both associated with my family. And my grandfather was one of the founders of Mars Hill College. And the college was founded on some of our land, my family land. So it's a deep kind of relationship we have to the land. And thankfully, we found each other
That's right.
because we have shared that for 65 years.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're lifelong learners and lifelong educators.
Yes.
Yeah.
Both of us. Bill started out his career teaching history at Irwin High School.
That's just super, super awesome. I just want to say, like, that's really, really cool. My other question is so off topic, and I hate going off topic because, like, I think that's just amazing.
Sometimes that's the most fun.
But I was curious in the photos themselves that you guys have collected, especially when you said you found the piece of music and you noticed it was a Masa photo on it. What like, how do you recognize a Masa photo when it doesn't have a?
I'm going to let Bill.
Well,
He confirmed my find. Okay.
well, one of the things that Massa did was that often in the left-hand corner of a photograph in white ink, he would place a number there. So that maybe the first thing you do is look for the number. Sometimes if it's an original print, when you turn it over, it will have a stamp for his business. On some of them, if it was a mountain scene, on the back of the picture, he will, in a pen, outline the mountains, and then with an arrow, have the name of the mountain pointing to the arrow. And he did a lot of that for Myron Avery with the Appalachian Trail. They were trying to get the route, so he would take pictures and do that. One of the other things is speculative on my part. Sometimes you look at a photograph or a postcard, it's like I found a postcard of Mouse Creek Falls on Deep Creek. And I think to myself, who else is going to come up here and take a picture of Mouse Creek Falls? But George Massa, so some of it is, as the auctioneers say, is attributed to him. But numbers, occasionally, but not very often, you'll find a copyright and you'll know it's his. The stamps, the outlines of mountains, and then the composition, like Alice talked about, that the clouds, the setting. And when I was doing the research for the Massa film, there was a fellow by the name of Charles Waddell who designed the Bee Tree Reservoir as part of the Asheville water system. And he contracted with George Massa to come up and take a picture. Later, I found out that he produced a brochure of civil engineering and used Massa extensively. But Massa set his photograph up, and when he got ready to Massa got ready to take his picture, he reached up and pulled a dogwood bough into the lens and took the picture. That story was told to me by his daughter. But
And I'll go back to the music a minute because the era is important. Who was doing a lot of photography commercial in this area in these early years?
Right.
And that is something that Bill found over and over and over, and is often not known, I would say, although there's a display, as you know, up there with some of the cards. Yeah, those cards.
And that's true, that people who wanted quality photographs, what's the architect for the actual city building in First Baptist?
Oh, Ellington.
Yeah, Ellington. Ellington designed the actual city building, and he contracted with George Masa to take pictures of the new building, and it appeared in the Architectural Digest in one of the months in 1928. Gloria Vanderbilt, Cecil, is that right? When they got ready to open the Biltmore House, contracted with, do what?
Not Gloria.
Say it again.
Edith.
Anyway,
65 years, see, we can fill out.
married Cecil. Anyway, when they were ready to open the Biltmore House, contracted Massa to take 26 photographs. The CVC series. We're wasting tape anyway. There was William Waldo Dodge, who was a silversmith, and he had in Biltmore Forest, he had a shop there, and he hired George Massa to take the interior of his shop, like 16 photographs of that, and they're just more and more of those kind of things.
It's threads. You just pull one thread, and then you pull another thread, and it's just like, okay. And just for Bill, that's exactly what he did. And lots of nights on eBay, and would sit there and here's Bill, and hey, and just one more thing, and he stopped doing that.
Cornelia Vanderbilt Cecil.
Yeah,
CBC.
and Edith was the other one. Thank you. As long as we get it, that's what's important, not Gloria.
Can you kind of describe like the excitement when you would find like a photo by Massa, maybe when you weren't even like looking for it? Like, what did that feel like for you guys?
Well, I'm running with a piece of music in my hand that I didn't even know I had, and I had that piece of music for, oh my goodness, probably 40 years or more. It had been a long time because it was another house, two houses back when it was given to me, and I just kept putting music as I had music on top of it, and it was thrilling. And I went flying into the library, you know. So, and Bill, every time he found something, we rejoiced, and then pieces would come in the mail, and we would sit and go through those, and just, it was intense.
I don't know, I suppose it's like panning for gold and getting a few specks, but find something that he had done. And some of the things, for instance, I was searching eBay, and I found a picture of a waterfall in the Smokies, but it didn't name it. But it was Thomas Branch Falls. I recognized it, and that image was in his guidebook, 1933 and 1935. And then a day or two later, I found Indian Creek Falls, just up the trail, not more than a half mile, also appeared in the book. And I don't know, it's just, if you're interested, it's just thrilling, you know.
And particularly for you, if you've experienced them on the ground, and we both have those two falls and other places in the Smokies where we've hiked, and then you have something that you can relate to, and that also helps the identification.
As an aside, on our first date in the Smokies, we walked past both of those waterfalls. So,
Our first date in the Smokies was just
1959 fall.
I think that's all.
Yeah, come on.
I've got one for each of you.
Oh, and I have to take some pictures of this. Our son told me today, and I forgot about it, but I will let you do yours and then I'll do mine. How is that?
That works. I've got a question for you, Bill. Okay.
Okay.
So we're talking about George Massa, and he's almost this, at least for me, a larger than life kind of a character.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned he's your hero. What does it mean to you to essentially encapsulate someone's entire life's work? I mean, that's got to be pretty emotional to think about.
That's a wonderful question. I guess that would answer on two levels. That for me, he has been an inspiration in terms of his dedication. That there's a life lesson in him for me personally, and one of the lessons is that if you're dedicated, sometimes you can achieve things much larger than yourself. So I try to see him as that example. But in trying to look at the whole thing, I think it is just such a rich, one person's rich contribution to the history of the area in the ways we've talked that is monumental. You know, when you measure it against other people, there's a humble, selfless man who never tried to do anything for himself, but his work was just major in terms of what it meant to the history of the area. And I feel like that's a wholly inadequate answer, but it's to a very good question.
Last thing. So, Alice, you found this piece of music. Did it feel at that time that you both were just kind of meant to do this?
We eased into it with a passion that we had for learning and for exploring. And by the time we got to the point that we saw the end of Massa's life, I think we both knew, yes, that we were just supposed to do this. Bill actually talked with one person that was still living and had walked with Massa, and that was a profound moment for him. And he did a recording, and when I listened to it, I think that was one thing. And I can remember when I was working in Buncombe County Schools, and I saw the old sanatorium when I was over in the Irwin High School area, and so I knew the building. And when we learned that Massa died alone there in that sanatorium, I think it put us all in, both of us, in grief. We've grieved that. We've shed tears. And he wanted a person that he had been with to come to him, and she didn't want to drive at night, and so she got there too late.
Rainy bad night.
Yeah. And so I think the intensity of his life, the sacrificial life that he lived, I think just consumed both of us. You know, obviously I would cry. It's how much we love him.
Thank you both.
Yeah. No, thank you all. I have no more questions.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you all so much, man. I love your passion. I really do. Yeah. And I think, like,